Hello, it is me, it is Becca. Welcome to a new format of video. This is me recording a presentation rather than filming with a camera. I hope that my audio though works just fine. I have my Apogee 1 microphone going, so this has all been very exciting setting it up, and what I'm really trying to do here with this video, we're just going to sit down and go through some things that I have noticed in the book of Genesis, and we're going to see if these things can really match up to reality. Can we really believe the Bible? Can we really believe anything in the book of Genesis about creation and about the world we live in? Because we want to be logical, we want to be scientific, we want to look at the evidence that's really in front of us. This is a little bit of apologetics. I've never done that before, but I do happen to be a Bible-believing Christian, and when it comes to apologetics, I'm using the definition that Google gave me: present arguments or writings in justification of something. So I'm also going along with you, coming back to reason and logic. This is also me experimenting, going into what does it mean to be logical. I was recently introduced to logical fallacies and arguments. This was a presentation by a Dr. Jason Lisle. Dr. Jason Lisle, he's a creationist, and he's got a great presentation. It's here on YouTube, Logical Fallacies and Evolution. I just got inspired by the rule of inference. I wanted to tell you guys about that and see if we can use it to, give a rational observation of the Bible and the world that we live in. So, I think, yes, you are probably very ready for me to actually get started. So welcome, by the way. If you do have any points, any questions, point it out to me. If I'm ever being unscientific, if I am saying something out of my own bias, if I'm saying something that I'm supposing rather than what is obviously evident in front of us that we can see. So that is exactly the realm of thinking that I want us to be in. I want us to all be thinking for ourselves and asking questions for ourselves, to come up with our own examination of what is really the truth. I only want to bring up what is absolutely true. I'm not going to push biases on anybody. At least that's what I'm trying to be like that. So if you do feel like I am, point it out to me. Give me any logical evidence that you have that would either improve or debunk my arguments. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Anyway, here's my contents page. We're going to go through a little bit of background for Genesis, very limited background, and then go into the definition of science. It's always good to all be on the same page about that before we go into things. And the rule of rational inference. This is really the basis of what we're doing. We're going to learn about the rule of rational inference and then apply it to some things that I found in Genesis. Then we will actually go through the 10 things that is inferred by the creation story and see if there is any evidence in reality for those things that the creation story has implied on the world. Okay, so I'm going to give some disclosure, of course. Nobody can be unbiased. I do happen to believe that a lot of what is in the Bible is non-fiction, and that it's true non-fiction. It's a true account of history, where it is an account of history, okay? Because obviously there are parts of the Bible, there's books in there that are actually poetry. There's books in there, there's the idea that perhaps Job is a play, maybe inspired by a real man, but the way that it's presented is actually very poetic. and it's not just an account of history. I do believe that the Gospels are history. I do believe that some of the things that happened, the Judges, that's history. But some parts of it, like Revelation, the prophets, a lot of what they say actually is quite metaphorical. It's quite dreamlike, it's quite visionary, and I'm not saying that that's exactly true. I'm saying there's some sort of truth in it, but reading it at face value is not an intelligent thing to do. I think that we have to be mindful of the context. So I am only saying here, when it comes to non-fiction parts of the Bible, things that claim to really be history, I do believe that they are true history. And it's a journey that I've had to go on my entire life, is understanding how it really fits into the history that exists within humanity, within what's being taught in schools, what's being taught and otherwise commonly known about the world. And I do somehow find that it all kind of fits. It's not too much of a stretch of the imagination for me to come to the conclusion that it is that there's some truth in it. So disclosing, yes, of course, I can't be unbiased. I do believe the Bible. And I'm also not able to cover any issues of translation. I'm not heavily studied in ancient Hebrew. We're just hoping and trusting, really, that the English version that we have today carries out the essence of the original translation, or not translation, but from the original copy. And I'm aiming to be scientific. So basically, what have I written here? If God is real and the Bible is really his word, then it will prove itself by being true. So I'm gonna basically lay down my sword. I'm not gonna stab at anybody that believes against the Bible. It's okay. If God's real, then he will prove himself. You know, he's a big guy. He can look after himself. He doesn't really need me to defend the faith so much as just to let the chips fall where they may. Ideally, everybody would also be doing the same thing. So that's where I'm at. Just we're gonna look at what is evidence and what is facts today, and I hope that you're all ready to come along with me and think for ourselves and ask our own questions about what's true. So here's the background of Genesis. The authorship is credited to Moses, a man who was a prophet, a man who was the leader of the Israelites, and he's the guy who brought everybody who was enslaved in Egypt out of Egypt. The author claims that it was non-fiction. We've got examples of that happening inside the Bible, inside of Exodus. It's not pointed out in Genesis, but in Exodus we have this notion from within the text saying that the reason why it was written is then the Lord said to Moses, write this on a scroll as something to be remembered. So Moses is saying within his own writings that he has been told by the Lord, Yahweh, the God Yahweh, to write down these things that he's witnessed, and that applies to, I think, really all of the Torah that he recorded. Those are the first 5 books of the Bible. Also, it's known as the Torah. And then, it was led by God to write it, supposedly. And when we cross-reference the creation story, we also have this particular quote that is credited to God himself. God spoke all of these words, and for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. So we've also got God saying that he created the universe, the world that we live in. If this quote is true, then of course the universe would have been made in 6 days. We're not going to look at that. We're going to look at some things that we can actually test, because of course no one can go back to the beginning. It's already been done. This is a picture, a timeline from the patterns of evidence in Exodus. This is a documentary that goes back and looks at the evidence of history. If there was a people group called the Israelites who were enslaved in Egypt and had an exit, that's what an exodus is, an exit, and supposedly it happened in 1445 to 1400 BC, and that is when this book is credited to have been written. So, I've got it. Here's your dates. So the book of Genesis was supposedly written also at this time. Now, modern scholars see that there is a chance it was perhaps not written in ancient times, not as ancient as that, but only 700 or 600 BC, somewhere in the middle of there. And the reason for this, I thought about this myself, and actually it may be because the original was destroyed, and since then we've got only copies, and those copies would have changes in the language. The original ancient Hebrew language was accordingly inspired by the language of Egyptians. They've got their picture language that tells little bits, little comic strips, those kind of that kind of a text, a language, those characters that they would have used. The Hebrews, the Israelites, perhaps made up their own version of that. The claim that I'm kind of making is that since the original was written, the original of Genesis and Exodus and the Torah, since that it's been destroyed, and the modern scholars looking at the copies that we do have today, they might see that it's written in language colloquialisms from the time of 700 to 600 BC, so it's not consistent with anything older than that. Okay, moving on to the definition of science. I just want us to be on the same page about this, and I'm going to bring in the law of identity just to explain that there can be some confusions, actually. When it comes to the law of identity, it says that each thing is identical with itself. Qualities of a thing cannot be removed from that thing. It is always what it is. I know that it may sound very silly, but I'm going to explain. Something to be careful with, of course, is the fallacy of equivocation. Qualities cannot be assumed of a thing by multiple meanings of the word that describe it. So if we're talking about science, which we are, science, whatever science is, it is what science is, and it is not what science is not. So I just kind of want to have myself taken care of, because we might have some arguments down in the comments below, and I don't want to allow this fallacy of equivocation. So we've got this example where the interchanging definitions of man is coming into play. When we're talking in logical arguments, we have to keep the same meaning for the word. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is when we are talking about science, we better not switch the definition. What is the definition of science? Before we've got to be on the same page about this. I'm bringing up just what Google says. The intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. We're talking about the first definition of the word science, and what that means is that science is not a noun. It cannot speak, it doesn't have a mouth, cannot prove anything. Scientists use science to prove things for themselves through observation. And instead of science being we're not going to use the definition of science where it is the understanding that has already been laid out, the conclusions that other people have already made to put together and say that they are the science of something. We're not talking about science being something that already exists about a topic. We're talking about science as a tool, a process, and a practice, something that we can do. It's a verb. People do science by observing and testing real things. And we cannot scientifically observe the origins of the earth. Don't know if you knew that, but we can't scientifically observe the world's origins, because whatever caused the world to exist has already caused it. We cannot go back to that point of time and watch it happen. We can't experience the universe at its beginning with our own senses. We can't touch the beginning, we can't see it, we can't smell it, we cannot taste it. We weren't there. We can't feel it. We cannot see it happening. It's not something we can scientifically observe. So, of course, we've got to instead look at the world around us and ask questions about what we can really put our senses to. Then we're being scientific. So that's what we are going to do today. So the logical rule of inference. Inference is it's, the meaning of the word infer. If something happens, then it infers another thing happening. That's what the law of inference is, basically. The rule of inference involves a function and a conclusion. The conclusion is a proposed result of the function. So, of course, we're talking about Genesis, and Genesis says that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, the function of that would be God creating. And the conclusion would be we've got an earth. We've got a creation. So the function of God creating a world, it infers that we would have a world. And in fact, logically, that makes sense. We do have a world. And so this inference of if it was God that created the world, then we would at least have a world. We can't say, though, from the fact that there is a world, it was created by God. A conclusion does not give proof to the function, but the function needs the conclusion for it to be a true function. If a particular effect is the result of a process, then without the reality of the effect, the process is assumed untrue. This is just a little example. If a light is working, that's the function, the light working, then the room will be lit. And if the function is true, then the conclusion must follow. However, we cannot know just from the conclusion if the proposed function is what made the conclusion happen. If perhaps the room is lit, we could think that there is a light working, but it also could be that it's daytime, and that's why the room is lit. There might be candles in use, or there might be some other reason for the room being lit. So, of course, we are not making any claims here that the evidence, if we do see any evidence of Genesis and reality, we're not saying that, or I'm not saying that it proves God or the story of Genesis. We're just looking for any inconsistencies of reality, if perhaps, because we're saying that, I'm saying that Genesis is a function and reality is the conclusion, and we're just looking at the parallels of that. So my proposal, of course, if the Hebrew Bibles account for the origins of the universe and the human condition is true, then the functions recorded in Genesis should have had a lasting effect on reality. That's what I'm talking about before with the law of inference. Genesis infers a number of conclusions that should be evident today if those functions were true. If these conclusions are not evident in reality, then it should be definitive that Genesis is a fiction rather than an account of reality. But if those conclusions are evident, then the functions proposed by Genesis are probable. They at least remain possible. We're not saying that they are they definitely are true from this. We can't use the rule of rational inference to say that Genesis is true just from the evidence that we have of the functions, what am I talking about? The conclusions. If the conclusions are true, we can suggest the functions are true, but we cannot prove that the functions are true. So I'm just being transparent about that. Of course, I'm not saying that Genesis is totally proven by this video, but we're going to look at the evidence, we'll try and ask for some evidence out of reality to see if it lines up with what the Bible is saying. So here we go. Some inferences of creation and the fall. What observable things that should have carried to today if the account of creation in Genesis is true? Let's have a look. Okay, basically I've already gone through and I've found some things that should be true. We're looking at number 1, diet. One of the things that is inferred by Genesis is that plants and fruit are good for food. So this is Genesis 1:29. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in them, they will be yours for food. So God is saying to the humans, to Adam and Eve, that they can eat the fruit. So that is a function, that is a proposal. A proposal of Genesis is that fruit can be good for food. Is this evident today? I think that I've eaten fruit, I've eaten plants, I've eaten broccoli, and I've eaten apples and all sorts of stuff that's full of vitamins and whatnot. They say today that a healthy diet is one that includes plants and fruit. So, of course, this has to be a function that perhaps exists. And is it possible to live off of these things alone? I think, yes, that's what we call vegetarianism. As a person who doesn't actually eat anything other than what grows in the ground from a tree. So the idea here is if it's proposed in Genesis that fruit and plants are good for a human diet, and if the reality of that is that we do have people who live as true vegetarians, that they do live off of seeds and fruit. Well, actually, a vegan is somebody who doesn't also eat anything that's also a product from another animal, eggs, honey, and milk, those sorts of things. So I don't know. I'm leaving this up to you. You can tell me, is it possible for a human to live off of just fruit and plants? That is something that is suggested by Genesis. And perhaps. I know from my own study of diets, there seems to be some benefits of only eating these things. It's perhaps there's all sorts of problems that can come from particular diets, and I wonder if anybody out there is a vegan themselves or a vegetarian. Let me know what you have observed through your own experience and testing, and basically that's what it is being scientific. Scientific is tell me for yourself what has come about from eating only a diet of seed-bearing plants and fruit. Number 2 is shame. Genesis infers experience with the emotion of shame before and after eating the forbidden fruit. So we've got a picture here of Adam and Eve. They're both naked and they felt no shame. Then what happens later on is they did something that they've been told not to, and at that moment their eyes were opened and suddenly they felt shame at their nakedness. So, basically, what Genesis is inferring, the rule of inference, is that humans experience shame. So, do they? Do humans experience shame today? I think I know what that is talking about. From my own experience, I have felt shame, particularly after doing something that I shouldn't have done, perhaps. Something that I didn't want other people to know about. Something that would have hurt my reputation of being a good person or somebody who just doesn't do particular things. So Genesis tells of humans experiencing shame and wanting to cover up when they've realised that what they've done was against what God told them. So there's also this idea, there's also an inference that when a person feels shame, they actually want to hide where they've fallen short, where they perhaps failed, or where they have done something that they weren't supposed to do. So I ask you, is there evidence within human behaviour? Do we really try and hide when we have done something wrong? Is it a part of human nature? I've witnessed that. I've witnessed, especially in my own self, actually. Of course, being scientific, I can only go from my own experience, what I've observed. And I definitely know that whenever I've hit my siblings when I was younger, when I would be physically abusive, basically, it would be in my nature to immediately cover that up. I would lie. Whenever my mother and father would ask me about that, my account, I would change it from reality and I would tell them that instead it was that I hadn't abused my siblings. So that is definitely, in my own case, I've got experience with shame and with trying to hide. So far, my own experience of reality does give evidence to the conclusions that are proposed of functions that are in Genesis. Number 3 is the serpent. Okay, so Genesis says there's a curse on humanity and the world. The curse in Genesis infers an enemy relationship between humans and an animal that's known as the serpent, which today we actually call the snake. So the verse here is in Genesis 3:15. I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He's talking to the snake, or the serpent. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. So, that is what is proposed by Genesis. Is that something that is evident in reality? Do snakes have hostility towards humans? I at least know that there is a mechanism within snakes. They'll bite humans. It's known that they're something to be wary of, and perhaps not disturb them, or if you come across a snake, to keep away from it, because it may cause harm to you. There's also hostility, I think, when it comes to people. People having hostility towards snakes. This is a quote from Lisa Fritzscher. I'm paraphrasing here, but the fear of snakes is possibly known as the most common fear of reptiles. Some researchers believe phobias related to reptiles, and specifically snakes, may be evolutionary, developed by our ancestors as a survival mechanism. However, this theory would not explain why snake phobias are relatively common, while fears of predatory animals such as tigers are rare. Some research shows that while the tendency to pay close attention to snakes may be evolutionary, the actual fear is learned rather than innate. So, that's a lot in there, but this woman is saying that the research has shown, some actual using science, has asked people, do they have a fear of snakes? And the answer seems to be that it's very common for people to say yes. And that may not be, of course, that where we've got the conclusion of the function here, but it may be that this fear of snakes is only a simple survival mechanism, or what's proposed in Genesis is actually that there's a curse, the curse that says that people and snakes don't get along. So it's interesting too, because she says here that it's learned. I don't know necessarily what it takes for a person to learn a fear of snakes, but I have never touched one or been attacked by one, and yet I definitely hate them. I even thinking about them now. If there was a snake in this room with me now, I would not be having fun. There's no way that I would enjoy that. So I kind of wonder what is the inferring for a learned fear rather than innate. I kind of feel like perhaps my fear of snakes might even be innate. I can't say that's for everybody, but I would say all it takes for me to have learned a fear of snakes is that they can be hostile towards humans. And so my own hostility comes out against them too. I'm wondering what you guys think. Have you got a fear of snakes? And tell me about that. Yeah, is it a learned fear, or have you actually experienced any attack or any brutality from snakes in your own experience? Or perhaps that fear might be innate. It might be something that actually is supposed in Genesis, that there's a curse on these animals, that we have not such a great relationship with them. Okay, inference number 4, the pain of giving birth. Genesis infers that it's painful for women to give birth. Now the quote here is from 3:16, Genesis 3:16. I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. So this is quoted from God talking to Eve, the woman, and he puts a curse on women for the sin that she's done. The punishment or the result of that is that giving birth is painful. Now, is that something that is evident in reality? This curse is the supposed function. So do the conclusions in reality line up with that? And now I don't think that it really. I went and Googled it, but my own mother is a midwife, and I think if she knew that it was a lie, that there's pain when giving birth, I think she would have made a point of telling me not to worry about it, because one day maybe I'll have children. But of course I can't go from my own experience. I've never given birth. I have other similar issues that are related to the ability to give birth. It's called a period, and there's pain with that. From my own experience, I can tell you that there is dreadful pain sometimes with just the ability to give birth and have a child. That whole system and function within a woman is something that causes pain. I definitely would say that I have had my own experience with that, and I would agree that there's pain there. But I went to Google, and what I got from the question is labour painful, or how painful is birth? This quote from the kidshealth.org says, pain during labour and delivery. Pain during labour is caused by contractions of the muscles of the uterus and by pressure on the cervix. Women experience labour pain differently. For some, it resembles menstrual cramps. That's something I've got evident experience with. For others, severe pressure. For others, extremely long waves feel like diarrheal cramps. So, of course, it doesn't necessarily need to give, we don't have to have specifics on how painful it is or what kind of pain it is when we're giving birth. However, my Google search, and this is just what I've come up with. Of course, you can tell me from your experience, is there a pain in childbirth? I think that if there wasn't, then we wouldn't have any description of that pain. So I think the answer is yes. We have there is pain in giving birth. Stars. Now this is something that's interesting. This is back from the actual creation. So what I am talking about, what we're looking at is kind of in the beginning, the story of the Garden of Eden. It's not just the creation, but there's a bit of like the story of the fall and the curse. But back in creation, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. That's Genesis 2:1. And that word there, completed, I could go into the ancient Hebrew, I really could. So if anybody wants me to explain that, I'll do that later in the comments. But the claim that Genesis makes is that no star or planet really, I think that's what it really is referring to, has been created since the creation. But of course, for creation to be finished, we need to see there being no new stars or planets coming into being. So is there evidence for this in reality? When it comes to quotes, I did find one. This is from Jason Lyle, PhD in astrophysics. There's no one's ever seen a star form anywhere. They call this a star forming region, but they're not seeing stars forming there. What they're finding there is blue stars, which they know cannot be billions of years old. And because they cannot accept a recent creation, they have to say stars have formed there very recently. So it must be a star forming region. But nobody's actually seen a star form. Now, I don't know how long astronomy has been a big thing. I don't know how long they've had lots of money in it, how long NASA, I do not know the origins of that, and the origins of stargazing. I suppose people have been looking at the stars for a long time, actually. And I suppose if it was seen where a star just suddenly appears, a new one in the sky, I suppose it would be a very significant event in history. Actually, there is one case, but it's actually also in the Bible. Apparently, when Jesus was born, this is way into the New Testament of the Bible, there was a new star in the sky on that night. Something that looked like a star, at least. But other than that case, which of course on that, supposedly, if that was a time when God was doing things, it could have been a supernatural event, this new star in the sky. And so we can't use that case as evidence for any new stars naturally forming. Natural stars forming, I don't know of any cases of it actually happening. If somebody's seen it in a telescope, or if they've looked in the night sky and suddenly there was a new star that stayed there, I think we might get that confused with stars shooting through the sky or whatever other burning things, comets and whatnot. But I wonder if you know of any cases of stars actually being witnessed when they're forming. But apparently, according to Genesis, that wouldn't happen. And I think reality it does line up with that. Reality, the evidence that we've got to scientifically observe with our senses, nobody's actually seen it happen. You know, it's difficult to not prove something or to say that nothing's ever happened. I don't know. I wonder if you've ever seen one. I'd love to know. Hit me down in the comments and yeah, tell me, have you seen a star form? The next point is the kinds. Genesis claims that particular animals are unable to interbreed. He definitely says that it's unsuitable for a man to be with an animal. At least interbreeding wouldn't be possible there, apparently. But here's the quote. From Genesis 1:25. God made the animals, wild animals, according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that came along the ground according to their kinds. So the Genesis story of creation, the Genesis account, says that kinds exist within animals and within people. People are a kind, apparently, and also within mammals, reptiles, fish, I suppose. Yeah, that's what it's saying. From Genesis 2:20. But for the man, no suitable helper was found. This is before a woman existed, before a woman was there in the story. There wasn't a suitable mate for Adam. So is there any evidence in biology that a human cannot make offspring with another animal? Now, I do not recommend going and researching this for yourself. All it took for me, if you're a young person, well, no, I'm not shy. I'm going to just tell you the truth is I went to Google just with the word bestiality, that is known for mating between man and animals, and the number of porn results that came up suggested at least there's been a number of times when humans have tried to make offspring with animals, or at least they have had the occasion where a pregnancy may have occurred or had the chance to, if it was possible. So there's that. Man and animal, I think that there's at least a separation with that kind. There's a separation with humans and other animals, so perhaps humans are their own kind, very different from other animals. I don't know if any apes and humans have ever, it's something that has been evident and observable. I don't know if there's any humans that have been observed and seen, if anybody's witnessed. Perhaps a human having an animal baby, an ape baby, or an ape having a human baby or a human-like baby. The humanoid. I don't know of any humanoid people. I've never met anybody that's half animal, so I don't think that's possible, and that would line up with what the Bible says, that there is kinds, with at least a separation in the biology from a human to other animals, and is also there an evident? Is it evident in biology that certain animals can only make offspring with some classifications or of a kind or family? So we know, at least, or I know from my own witnessing, I don't know about you guys, but I've never seen any human-animal combination babies. Have there been any other animal combination babies or creatures? So, for example, we do have this happening. We do have a little bit of it happening. There's an animal called a liger or a lion. It depends on what the father is, but this is tigers and lions mating together and making a new or combined animal. But I think that it actually is within a kind, whatever the kind is that is mentioned in Genesis. I do think we have those because they have the same family and the same genus. They're Pantheria. They're both big cats. I don't think that we would have any combinations of this happening perhaps between a cat and a dog, though. I think that those are probably different kinds and that they can't mate together. I don't know. I don't know if they've tried. There's also this creature called a mule. It is the child of a horse and a donkey. A male horse and female donkey, I think. Don't quote me on that. But this creature does also have the same. We've classified our biology with our animals and given them families and genuses up to kingdom. You can look at that. Just on Wikipedia, really. It's common knowledge that we classify animals as family, genus, and then species. And I think that these classifications are perhaps what kinds mean in the Bible. And in Genesis, they're talking about animals being created within different kinds. I think there's boundaries within biology. I think we have evidence for that. There are, of course, this is a kama. A kama is a baby between a llama and a camel. Now, those have got the same family, but not the same genus. However, that family might be what the classification of a kind is. So within a family, different genuses. We've got evidence of them having offspring together, but it still has some sort of boundary. They don't go outside of the family. And the wolfen is offspring with a bottlenose dolphin, a common bottlenose dolphin, and a false killer whale. Didn't know what that was, but they also have the same family. Different genuses, different species, of course, but they do have. There is this barrier in the biology that they have to be within the same family. They are in the same family to allow this creature to be an offspring of these two animals that are in different species, different genuses. So I would really love to know if there's any other examples you guys have seen. If you've seen any that break this family. I know that there's a lot of photos on Google Images that are photoshopped. I can at least assure you that these particular creatures are real. A guy on YouTube video told me. Yeah, that's credible, isn't it? But I wonder if there's any examples. I haven't seen any for myself. I haven't actually. I think these combinations of animals are rare, and it's difficult to come across them. So I wonder if it was possible for animals to interbreed, like despite barriers of kind. I would see more of these animals. I'd see more of these combo animals running around, but I don't see them. I think that what's proposed in Genesis, the function proposed that there is kinds, I think that is that the conclusion is a part of reality, that it does line up. Okay, hopefully home stretch. It's a very long video, but I hope you're enjoying it. Number 7 is a knowledge of morality. This is a very interesting thing. Is Genesis claims that it was after Adam ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that there was a change in how humans perceived their own actions. Suddenly, they went from ignorant to understanding that some things are good to do and some things are bad. This is from Genesis 3:6. The woman saw that the fruit of the tree was desirable for gaining wisdom. We've also got evidence here that they knew, perhaps, that their thinking would change, or their understanding of the world would grow after consuming this fruit. Something would happen within their within wisdom. Then the eyes of both of them, this is after they ate the fruit, and it was eating the fruit was, of course, something they were told not to do, that the eyes of both of them were opened. So Genesis claims that there was a change after they ate this particular fruit from what is known as the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This is Genesis 3:22, the man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. This is apparently God talking to the hosts of angels. Perhaps he was talking to some other angels, or himself. Some people say that he was talking to his own within the Trinity, the Jesus, Spirit, and Father, Son thing. But somebody God was talking to. God was saying that that after eating this fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the humans, they became like one of us, knowing good and evil. So it was that action, or there was a change. There was something that they did, and now they know good and evil. So that's the question. That is what is proposed, that humans know good and evil. Is that in reality? Genesis infers a definitive sense that people have now for knowing what is something, that there are some things we can do that are good and some things we can do that are bad. So, is it typical that people have an understanding of morality? This, I think, is something that is debated quite a lot, especially when it comes to debates between atheists and agnostic or Christian people, or just other religions. There is a question of morality. Do we have morality, or do humans? That's not really the question. The question is, perhaps there is a morality, but are humans aware of it? Are humans aware of some things being good and some things being bad? I think that's what a lot of issues are among humans, is that some people have differing opinions on what is good and bad. But of course, nobody goes around. I don't think I've met anybody. Of course, I haven't asked everybody that I've met, but I don't have evidence for meeting somebody who had absolutely no understanding that some things are good and some things are bad in comparison to one another. There's this quote here from Billy Graham, who says that God has placed within every one of us something that cries out aloud against us whenever we do something wrong, especially when we're young, before our conscience gets hardened or seared and finally dies. Apparently, we have something called a conscience. This, or the whatever it is, that the knowledge of good and evil, we now call it a conscience. So is that evident? Do people really have a conscience? I think I've got one. I think that I have one. I don't know about you guys, but tell me down below. I want to have a bit more data to look at. Do more people have consciences? Is there anybody who doesn't have a conscience, who doesn't believe that certain things could be good or certain things could be bad? There is an evolutionary theory for the development of a conscience. So even evolutionists who don't believe in the Bible, what the Bible says is there is a knowledge of good and evil, but evolution theory says that there is a development for the conscience. At least it doesn't dispute that there is a conscience. Let me read this from a book. Is There Anybody Out There by Matthew Grant. He says that evolution, on the other hand, teaches that human conscience has evolved over time. This view holds that people who act unselfishly or cooperatively survived in greater numbers than those who were selfish and cruel. Therefore, these genes were passed down to us, and now have a greater majority of us feel that unselfish behavior is right. So apparently, what you think is right or wrong, it can be different from other people, because you've inherited what that particular belief is of a particular thing being good or bad, as it differs from other people. And I'm not sure about that, because I think that I've had my own beliefs about what some things could be good or bad, that they have changed. I just don't really think that it's something that I've inherited, because unlike something that I have inherited, for example, is my hair colour. That isn't something that has changed so much as I've grown up. It's always stayed red. My skin colour, that's something I inherited. I'm a white person. It's something that you inherit, is not something that usually changes. And I have my own conscience, my own understanding of what some things are wrong and some things are not. I think I've been able to decide for myself if I can change my conscience. I can change, as I suppose what Billy Graham is suggesting is that a conscience can be hardened or seared. It could die, but ultimately that everybody does at least start off with a conscience of knowing that there are some things that are right and some things are wrong. And even if they were determined by something physical within our genetics, the evolutionary theory doesn't dispute the existence of a conscience, the existence of a knowledge of morality, of right or wrong. So basically the proposed inferred idea, the function that happened in Genesis is God placing a tree of knowledge of good and evil, and that function is that humans ate that and then gained knowledge and gained understanding of morality. At least the conclusion of that it would be that people do know a difference between good and wrong. We do have that happening in reality. That is evident, that as far as I've seen. I don't know about you guys, but yeah, I've seen that happening, at least for myself. The toil of farming, number 8. The curse implies there is no way other than hard work to cultivate plants and in the earth. This is interesting. This is of course something that we can only speculate really on what other methods could be mentioned. But here's the quote: "Cursed is the ground because of you." God is talking to Adam after he there was this kind of the punishment for him doing something that was not what God wanted him to do. Not punishment, I don't know, but just the consequence perhaps. Through painful toil you will eat food from it. As Genesis 3:17. Genesis 3:19 says, "By the sweat of your brow you will eat from the earth." So this is suggesting that there is only this one way to grow plants, and it involves hard work. Now, I know that you don't have to sweat every time. I think you can drive. My father, he runs a farm, and he's got tractor drivers who can stir up the soil and put seed down and cover it all up. That happens. Well, you can do that with a tractor. There's lots of different ways that that you can grow plants, but it's sort of all the same way that soil has to be prepared, and that we have to plant seeds, and that we have to watch it grow. We have to take care of it. And it takes a long time, or it takes within its own season. I think that's evident. I think, though, that what Genesis perhaps infers is that there may previously have been a way to go about it differently. This is only one suggestion I've been able to come up with, is perhaps botanical communications. I don't know if you know of the movie Sky High. The girl in this film, the red-headed one, she's able to control plants and communicate with them through supernatural or superpowers, to say to the plants, to grow. I don't know. I definitely know that that's not possible. At least I haven't seen that happen in reality. I haven't seen that. It's not a natural thing. It's not natural for plants to grow basically any differently than with this hard work, where you toil over the soil and you have weeds come up above it as well. You have thorns and thistles. So I wonder if anybody else has seen, maybe doing planting in a laboratory has changed the ability to grow plants. But as far as I know, it's always a very difficult, it's the same long time and under the right conditions. And yeah, so this is where I need your help as well. If you have any understanding of other ways for plants to grow. As far as I know, I've only seen them grow one way. Number 9 is death. So something that Genesis claims is that after Adam sinned, God made it so that humans could not live forever. This is Genesis 3:22. The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and also take from the tree of life and eat it and live forever. So apparently God is saying that humans shouldn't be able to live forever. I don't know about you, but if this is true, then people don't live forever. I haven't seen this happening, that people do. I haven't met anybody who's immortal. I don't have any experience of meeting someone who's never died. Well, of course, everybody I do meet is somebody who hasn't died, but I always anticipate that in fact I will die one day, and I always anticipate that the people I meet are people who will one day die. I'd love to know if you know of anybody who is really, 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 really old and doesn't seem to have an end to their life coming. It's a bit difficult to observe this. Apparently, of course, humans were designed to be able to live forever. If a person was unknowing good and evil, if they could reverse that, if they could reverse ever doing something wrong, if they could reverse knowing good and evil, then perhaps they could live forever. But I don't know of any person who's like this. I think that's something that is promised. The afterlife of the Bible talks about a resurrection and people living forever again, being able to have life again, and in that scenario there won't be any pain or suffering and no death in that scenario. So it's something I think we fantasize about, but it's not reality in this time, in this evidence in this reality that we have now. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't die. What's proposed by Genesis is the fact that people die is because of Adam sinned. Adam took from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and now people die. Of course, that might not be the cause why everybody dies, but that is what the Bible says. So that at least we have the conclusion, but maybe not the function is true, but that is the conclusion is evident in reality. Now, final one that we're going to discuss is dust to dust. Genesis claims that the first human Adam was formed from dirt, and that to this form human bodies will return to dust after a person is done with their body when they die. Genesis 3:19, until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and dust you will return. So I don't know much about death. I haven't witnessed many people die, and I haven't seen a human body change into dust after a person has died. But I do think it's common knowledge that bodies actually decompose. Of course, what is proposed by Genesis is that if people die, then their body turns into dirt again. I know that the Egyptians found a way to preserve bodies if you wrap them up and keep them away from oxygen. Is it a way to keep a body in its fleshy form? But most cases, it's quite typical, actually, I think, that we do observe a change with a dead body. It's when a person dies, their body doesn't stay fleshy, it doesn't stay squishy. It kind of just, I think, as far as I know, and as far as I know of evidence and reality, is that that they turn into dust again. I don't know about again, but what's proposed by Genesis is that bodies turn to dirt when a person dies, and I think that the conclusion of that is true. That we do have that happening. So I don't know about the function, that it is because God made humans out of dirt, and that's that turning back into dirt is a return to the original substance. But that's definitely something that we have evidence in the conclusion for. So wondering about the function, there's we can't scientifically observe the function, but we do have the conclusion that we can observe. So some other ideas that Genesis infers: there's only one suitable creature. The only creature suitable to be a wife for a man is a human woman. That's, I think, it's something that is inferred by Genesis. Something that is inferred by Genesis is unsuitable for man to be partnered with any animal. We have mentioned that. Plants bear seeds to reproduce after their own kinds. We talked about the kinds of animals, but apparently plants also only produce after their own kinds. And thorns and thistles, those are things that grow. Apparently, the function of that is the curse. Before the curse, there wasn't thorns and thistles, but who knows? And it's also inferred by Genesis that the serpent known as the creature known as the serpent, which we know today as the snake, is a creature that doesn't crawl on its legs and feet, that in fact it goes on its belly. I know of lizards that are things that are reptiles like a serpent, but it does have legs. I'm not sure though if that is the serpent, if it might be the species of the serpent, but or the kind or the genus. I'm not sure, but those are just some other things that I have thrown in here. So, conclusion. Considering the role of rational inference, the functions mentioned in the Hebrew Bible's account for the origins of the universe and the human condition needs to have had lasting effects on reality for us to observe them as true, for us to scientifically bear witness to those effects. Genesis infers a large number of conclusions that should easily be observed if those functions were true. If those functions happened, then those conclusions would be there, and we should be able to see them. And I think that we do. The observable functions proposed by Genesis have the appropriate conclusions in reality. I think we've, as far as my knowledge allows, I don't think that there's anything contradictory between those functions and reality for the conclusions that they suggest. The biblical account for the universe's origins don't happen to be contradicted by the evidence of the world today. The things that we can really scientifically observe, they actually line up to say that maybe the functions of the Bible are true, or perhaps they're at least through looking at creation, the creation that we have that does exist, the biblical account for the origin could be probable, at least. It cannot be ruled out by honest scientific observation. At least it remains possible. So, yeah, ultimately we cannot find any contradictions through the proposed conclusions, looking at rational inference. The conclusions that should be observable are available to witness, as opposed to that they are not there. I think if it was the opposite, people would live forever, that birth pain would not be a thing we worry about, and just the opposite of everything that we've just talked about. I think the world perhaps is the way that it is because of what is mentioned in Genesis. However, those proposed ideas from Genesis might not be the actual reason for why the world is the way it is. However, the world is the way that Genesis says that the world is. That's what I'm getting at. So if you want to continue this discussion with me, we can go down in the comments below. Definitely leave your questions and comments, and give me your data for these things happening. Have you seen the conclusions that are possible because of what is proposed in Genesis? Let me know your thoughts down below. Otherwise, you can hit me up on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. I don't know why you would want to talk to me on Instagram, but on Twitter and Facebook at least. If you're on Facebook, this video is also on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, this video is also on Facebook. You can share it. And yeah, I don't know what else I have to say. I've definitely said enough, really. I hope that you found this interesting. I hope that you are thinking for yourself and asking your own questions about this topic, about the origins of the universe. I think it's a great rabbit hole to go down. So thank you for following along if you have to this point. And I'll just see you in another video or in the discussions that we continue with this. Okay, so see ya.